Welcome to Leadership Conversations. My name is Josh. I'm the pastor at Rehope Belfast, and I'm so thrilled that you're here today with us for today's great conversation. And hey, while you're here, why not hit subscribe? Wherever it is on your screen right now, just go ahead, hit subscribe. We would love for you to get this content straight into your inbox as we continue to develop these conversations. So without further ado, let's dive into today's conversation, which I know is going to be such a blessing to you wherever you are. So without further ado, here's today's leadership conversation.
I'm delighted this time around to be joined by my good friend, my pastor, my senior pastor, my leader. You've got many titles in my head. Brian is the senior pastor of Rehope Global, let's say, and we're just delighted.
That sounds way too glorious. I mean, any pastor of any church could, they could be like, I'm the pastor of this church global because it's whatever, but not as grand as you're painting me to be. Yes.
But thank you for jumping on with us today. And so we're kind of going through this series of conversations around leadership in transition or crisis is a bit of a bigger, more grandiose term. But before we kind of dive into that, like paint a bit of a picture of you, like Brian. You've got a wife, kids. You're obviously in lockdown mode with your family. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, great. Well, I was not born in Glasgow. I was born in Seattle, moved over across the world in 2003 to Glasgow, Scotland. And I mean, that in and of itself is quite an upheaval, quite a change, quite a transition. I mean, my wife had never been east of Chicago in her life. We had a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old. And just kind of picking up selling basically everything except for about a 10 square foot box worth of stuff and moving over. I regret selling my snowboard still, but I got a new one this year. So finally, after like 17 years, I have a snowboard again. So that's fun. But
you've been out?
Downsizing. What? Oh yeah. Until the lockdown, I was up a few times. It was just so good for my soul. It was amazing. It's beautiful up there. I was up at Glencoe. Amazing. But ultimately, just a massive life transition, leading a family through that, and kind of landing in a different culture, and trying to lead well, trying to start a church. It not going well at first. Actually, that's its own joy and heart challenge and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, then we had the typical, I want to say typical without cursing anybody out there, but like very standard crises along the way for a new church. Didn't have a locked down location a lot and had to relocate several times. And each relocation is a pretty big leadership challenge because you're trying to navigate people from one context, and hopefully they like that context, into another context. And in our experience, sometimes that next context wasn't as enjoyable or it wasn't as convenient or things like that. And you're watching, you're leading your church through people leaving, relocating, maybe even it's not your ideal. In 2006, I just about fell apart. I mean, I remember 2006, it was, we had this really cool old church building in the west end of Glasgow. Mm-hmm. And we made an offer to buy it because the owners were going to sell it, and we got outbid by £1 million, which is way more than we didn't even bid $1 million. Like I think we bid like 300,000 because that was what it was worth as a church building. But some developer came in and just put in a huge bid, and so with a huge amount of disappointment, and that came after just the labor and the agony of trying to get that church going, and just forwards and backwards and slow start. I just had the slowest of starts, and finally we got it going just as it was catching. We got to about 80 people, and then we had to move, and we lost half the people in the move. We were in the back room of this church building, which I'm thankful for, but also it was in the afternoon. It was so away from anything that I had wanted. And it's probably the closest I've ever been to just depressed and discouraged in leadership. And I learned a lot from that moment about myself, and especially as we came out of that moment, because that crisis didn't last forever. I couldn't see any solutions at any point for those first couple months of that transition. But I know I hated the moment. I was so frustrated. It was so not ideal. But I think really God had to teach me some stuff as a leader, because there was going to be other transitions coming and
Yeah.
other crises coming. But that comes back to a major learning moment, because I was so needlessly distraught and so blind to the thankful things, to the good things. I couldn't enjoy the gifts, like we had a place to meet. I couldn't enjoy the new people that were coming, because it was just not what I wanted to be. So I learned a lot. And because really at the end of the day, if you want to lead people through a transition, you got to be able to lead yourself first. And you got to lead yourself spiritually first. You've got to lead yourself emotionally first. And even just like staying in good health physically. You've got to be able to lead yourself so that you can lead well the people around you. And so, joy after joy. You were there in 2009 when we ended up getting 2 weeks notice of having to move out of what ended up being the same church building, but there's a long story there. And that 2 weeks crisis moment, and again moving into an awful situation for a short term, but navigating it a lot differently, having kind of learned some lessons along the way. And that kind of went back and forth. Hopefully as we learn and grow in our experience as leaders and go through the awful moments, we learn, hey, God can be trusted. God can be trusted, that the crises aren't forever, and it's gonna be okay. But yeah, that's kind of my story. And I wish it was all location based. A lot of times challenges and crises are people based, or maybe even like leadership challenges. I know that's, who's ever heard of a church turning against their pastor? I don't know. We haven't actually had that in Rehoboth, at least as far as I'm aware, unless it's happened in Belfast. No. Praise God for that. Over all these years, we haven't had that happening. Maybe a person or two, but really just one person can just cause a lot of hurt and ruin a few good friendships. So had some of that in the lighter version of it, knowing a lot of people have a lot worse. But yeah, we've had a lot of crises, transitions, and whether it's moving overseas, leading the church, and just life in general. So
lots of changes. Like we're obviously at the moment in lockdown mode, both here in Northern Ireland, there in Scotland. You mentioned there a little bit around gratitude, and how sometimes, like, you're going through a crisis moment, and actually what changes is our heart towards the things of joy. And actually in that moment we can miss out on the good things, because even in the middle of transition and crisis and all of those pain points and those pressure moments, like there's still those moments of joy where God's doing stuff, where your family's doing stuff, where you and of yourself are learning stuff and growing. Maybe just talk about that for a moment, like in those moments of crisis and transition, which people listening right now may well be feeling in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis. How do you begin to cultivate gratitude against the backdrop of crisis?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's navigating this crisis from their own starting points, right? And everybody's has their own disappointments, and some of their dreams have crashed, or some of their fears have escalated. And I was actually in a sabbatical, and the only sabbatical I've ever taken in my life, and I had a moment, yesterday or something like that, and actually a few different times along the way where I was grieving. Well, I kind of lost my sabbatical. Like I kind of lost some weeks, like about 3 weeks of not that long of a sabbatical as far as sabbaticals go, but like, well, okay, that wasn't exactly how I wanted it to go. And I think that we're masters at being able to grumble and to see what's not how we want it to be. It's not comfortable to be locked down, but ultimately, I've been anchoring in on a few things. One, the thankfulness about the time with my family, and it's very easy to forget the goodness of cultivating your own home when everything else seems so big and important out there and urgent and everything like this. And this season of just being able to stop, we've not just like lived together as a family and been here like day and night for for together, and even some of our exercise walks have been like together as a family, like constantly together. And yet we've kind of been able to lean in not only with thankfulness, but also trying to have fun together. And we played board games and card games, heaps of Uno every day, all that kind of stuff. And just trying to not just survive, but to try and move thankfulness and then enjoying what we have, not grieving what we don't at the moment.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of what I'm aiming to do, move past, getting to thankfulness, letting go of the disappointments, getting to thankfulness, and then trying to just enjoy the gift that this is and seeing it that way. I think this is a gift.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the gratitude, it's the thankfulness, it's the perspective, and not allowing the disappointments to rob your joy.
That's great.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm innately aware of through all of this is the protection of my soul, of my connection to God. Like, is there anything that you've been doing, or you as a family have been doing, that's helping you to do that, to cultivate, maybe healthy rhythms in your day that is helping you, but also you before others in your house, to point them to Jesus and to keep that place healthy?
Yeah, these moments are great when it comes to potentially resetting. You can really reset your soul at a time like this, because you're out of your rhythm and you kind of get to rebuild, especially you're literally locked in your home, or not really locked, but we're in lockdown. We're supposed to be in our houses. And so you can reset your rhythms. But thankfully I already had solid rhythms in my life beforehand. And actually, if you want to be a leader that is able to lead people in crisis, you don't want to be having to figure out your soul rhythms in the crisis. Although you can, and that is, there's an opportunity in each crisis to go back to God. Mm-hmm. Ideally, though, you are years in rhythm and abiding with God. And Josh, for years, I have this hour Jesus time every morning, just kind of getting my soul right. I would do this cover to cover Bible reading, not connected to that. I love doing prayer walks, and like I have a long time practices of trying to walk in step with God. And I don't have to, in this crisis, discover, okay, how am I going to connect with God here? How am I going to start a legitimate quiet time now that I can? But now, again, if you're not there, then yeah, use this time for that. But really thinking big picture for the rest of your life as a leader, you want to have that rhythm in place so that you can help other people develop those rhythms that you already know well in advance. I believe in when you're leading people in any time, but especially in crisis, you've got to be able to listen to what God's thoughts are. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that ear towards heaven already, well, that is the place to start in any crisis. I think of David and David's, he's in a crisis. His people want to stone him because their town's been kidnapped, and their wives and kids are all taken, and their stuff's all taken. And it's a bad moment. It's a serious crisis for David personally, because his people are turning on him, and his family's been kidnapped and everything like that. And he strengthens himself in the Lord. And that was his first leadership move. And then he inquires whether it's going to be successful for them to go after the people. I mean, that story is just the great first steps of leading in crisis, because you're like, okay, God, I'm thrown, I'm under threat, I'm feeling upheaval, and I need to go back to the basics. God loves me. God is aware of me in every moment. I am not just a random victim of life. I am actually being watched over by a God who's much bigger than my crisis. All these true statements. God's much bigger than my crisis, much bigger than this situation. God's not unnerved by this. I don't need to be unnerved by this. I can be at peace by being anchored in what I believe is absolutely true about God as he's described in the Bible, that he's trustworthy. And so you can strengthen yourself in the Lord first in every crisis. If you go through upheaval, getting back to that, strengthening yourself in the Lord, and then inquiring of the Lord, God, how do you want me to lead this church during this time? How do you want me to lead my family during this time? What is the atmosphere? Is there any changes that you want to make in my home? Mm. And, different people respond differently in crises. And some people actually lose their anchors. They let go of the right things because of the crisis. Mm-hmm. They get wound up instead of dialed in to God and his heart. And it's easy. I have a personality that could quickly just go into troubleshooting mode. But when it comes to leading in crisis, troubleshooting is like the most minor prerequisite for leading in crisis. It's like the bottom. It's like that's like the most standard minimum. And yet sometimes people make troubleshooting the all in all. Mm. The main things are abiding, getting your direction from God, listening, navigating people, not via troubleshooting, but towards God's purposes for the season. Mm. And that requires just kind of that zooming out and bigger perspective, getting God's bigger perspective. Because the best leaders think deeper. Mm-hmm. And the best leaders just seek those deeper thoughts. Like, what is God doing? What is happening spiritually in this situation? What are the opportunities? What are the opportunities that God has for us in this crisis? Well, how can I challenge people to not respond the normal ways to things, but to think, like God has a good opportunity in this crisis for us. I mean, we do this family time thing, or we have been for the last couple of weeks. It probably will disappear one of these weeks relatively quickly, as the crisis passes and things goes back to normal. And crises are temporary. Mm. They don't feel temporary in any given moment, but they are temporary. And I think one of the gifts that leaders can bring to any crisis is helping people remember that this is temporary and there's great things that can only be learned in them. Mm-hmm. And it's easy in crisis to get caught up in the crisis, yeah. But actually to zoom back and to think deeper and to be like, okay, what is the opportunity that we can learn and grow in? We can grow in intercessory prayer right now. We can grow in our faith, seeing God provide right now. We can grow in seeing God's, I mean, in this COVID-19 crisis, we can grow in seeing God's global intervention potentially, or seeking God's global intervention in a powerful way. We can grow in compassion for our leaders and for our city and for our nation, and we can learn how to live in peace when everybody else is naturally living in fear. Like that's a gift. Yeah. You learn how to live in peace in a crisis time because you can trust God, because you believe in him, you believe he's trustworthy, and if you can learn how to live in peace in a global fear situation, that's a gift. That's a gift for the rest of your life as you learn those skills. Yeah. So anyways, that thinking deeper, and then as leaders, helping other people walk the same path that you've been walking, like how to strengthen themselves in the Lord, how to grow in peace, how to maximize those opportunities. And yeah, but leadership, it starts with you, and you learn the lessons yourself first, and then you help other people learn them. Yeah,
it's great. It's really cool. But fairly kind of bigger, broader picture. Obviously, you mentioned you've been on sabbatical, taking some time out to slow down, stepping away from the day-to-day rhythms of teaching and all that kind of stuff. What do you sense as you're kind of stepping back in now to? I think today, as we record, this is kind of your first kind of official start date back into the fold, as it were. And I think you're preaching this Sunday
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Back in a while. Yeah.
So as you're kind of stepping back in, and obviously you're stepping back in the middle of a crisis transition moment for which we're all in, and the church is, I mean, you're going to be speaking to an empty building on Sunday, and doing church online and all this kind of stuff, as many of us are at this point in time. Like, what do you feel in your spirit, like, that God is maybe teaching you or teaching the church in these days? Big question, I know, but
Yeah, well, even as you're asking the question, I was like just thinking of the different things that I could say, because I wanted to have a better answer to that question when I got back from sabbatical. And in fact, I spent some time in sabbatical in Jerusalem, and was studied at the Jerusalem University College there for a month, basically in January. And on the last day back, I was standing on Mount Nebo, which is actually in Jordan, and I was looking across to the valley, and I could see, towards Israel, across the Jordan River. And what I was about to do is get in a car and drive down to the valley, back to Jerusalem, repack my bags, take a quick nap, and then head out to the airport that night to fly home. Like, I'm at the very end of my trip. And when I'm standing at Mount Nebo, I've been in Jordan for a couple of days at that point, and I could look back at the ancient land of Moab and Edom and in that area, and it was just crystal clear. Like, it was so vibrant. It was like the air was like crisp and sharp and everything like that. But then when I was looking ahead across the valley to where I was going, as I'm looking at returning, it was really foggy and hazy and not clear. You could see a few lines here, but it was pretty disappointing. And I don't like those moments. I don't like those moments when that's true about life, where when you look ahead and it's not totally clear. But I felt like God spoke to me right there on that mountain. And luckily it wasn't like Moses. Moses got a clear view, but he died. I got a foggy view, but I lived, and I was able to come home. I'm totally fine with that. But I feel like he spoke to me about, Brian, this next step isn't about having all the answers as you move back in, but actually to enjoy clearly what I've taught you already, and then to walk forward day by day in faith and in trusting me, in peace, not obsessed about what you can't see, but rooted in what you know. And what is so clear, and I kind of taken that back with me. I mean, you know that I'm a natural born strategist, and to a fault. Like, I can't turn it off. Like, I invent strategies for things that will never happen. Like, well, what if this happens? It's like, yeah. Anyways, I over strategize. I think about everything way too much. But in this time, God's like, no. This strategy is going to be, Brian, you know enough. But right now, through this time, it's going to be about living at peace, without all the answers, living step by step, and just trusting me for the next step. My mentor gets up every day, and he's like, God, he's well retired. He's in his late 70s. And he's like, God, what's your assignment for me today? He doesn't know what's going to be going on in each day, and I've spent all my life just so big picture, and I think what God's teaching me now is to be mindful of the moment, living deeply rooted on what I've learned and what I know about God and what is true, and walking forward with people, and yeah, so that's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's all part of leadership. Sometimes God gives us, in times of crisis, all this great vision of what's going on and why, and there's examples of that in the Bible. Sometimes He just asks us to walk with Him and to trust Him, and I think that it's great to be a leader. I mostly enjoy being a leader who sees clearly and has that vision and is just like, guys, this is it. I see it. Just trust me. Let's go this way. Yeah. But it's also amazing to be like, let's trust Jesus on this one. And let's show that we trust Him by having a peace that passes understanding,
Mm.
a unshakable calm, deeply rooted in trusting God, as opposed to one that's in the clear sense of what's next.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, I've got thoughts about the church, but they're actually not any new thoughts that I felt like God had already given me before sabbatical. And I was a little bit surprised by that. But at the same time, it can be a gift not to know, because you get to practice other things. And I think that's what I'm getting to enjoy this season.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, with all that said, thank you so much for your time. Why don't you just pray for us, and pray particularly for maybe if there's a leader who's listening in who's just maybe struggling with this crisis moment, and is desperate to hear God's voice through all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you pray? It'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Father, I pray for help and clarity, and specifically for any leader out there who is really struggling to discern what you're trying to do in this moment, or how you're leading in this moment, or what you might be saying in this moment. God, I just pray grace over that leader, and I pray for an eyes opening, like that you would just open the eyes of that person or those people to hear, to see, to know. And God, even if you decide you're not going to reveal the next step, at least reveal your presence, so that there can be just that confidence that you're here and you're walking with us. But God, I specifically do ask for revelation for everybody, for that clarity on how to lead, because we know, God, as your leaders, we are supposed to lead people to follow you. So help us to see you so we can follow you and help people follow you. Lead us clearly in that. God, I pray for your grace over every leadership misstep that we might be making at this time, for any insensitivities that might be coming in our homes or in our leadership because of stress and crisis. God, I pray that you would grant us calm, peaceful, loving hearts that are in tune with your Spirit, and that are showing the evidences, the fruit of your Spirit at this time. Peace, patience, joy, things like that. God, we want to be your leaders who reflect your attributes and who honor you in our ways. God, I pray that you protect our homes, protect our families, and lead us clearly. If there's patience needed when it comes to neglecting time with you in this season or before this season, God, I am thankful for the grace that you've shown me, and how you basically just demanded that I spend this time with you in a clear prayer moment, and I just pray for that kind of patience and grace with all of us. Help us in Jesus' name, I pray.
Amen. Well, Brian, thank you for getting involved in this conversation today. Look forward to you being back amongst us. Now you're back from sabbatical. Yeah. And look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. See you, Josh.
Take care, buddy. Thank you.
Bye now.